So yeah, so I've got one question, which is a really good question actually, which is how do you deal with strong emotions coming up during meditation? Um, so in some ways, it depends what the strong emotions are. Like if there's a whole range of strong emotions. I mean, strong emotions could be um, strongly positive emotions or skillful emotions, a strong feeling of love, a strong feeling of sympathy with others, a strong feeling of compassion. Um, they might also be strongly negative, like maybe profound anger or resentment or jealousy, rage. Um, So I suppose the first thing about if whatever arises in meditation is just to notice that it's there and to sort of in a way be with the experience. That's probably the first thing. Often when strong stuff arises in meditation, we immediately react by wanting to push it away, and that makes us tense. So that's part of the integration process, is allowing into awareness whatever is there and being with it. You could say that the positive emotion aspect is having done that, having developed awareness and allowed whatever is there to sort of be there and be present and be acknowledged. The positive emotion bit is about steering it, is about moving things on. So having had a broad awareness of what's going on, is you then begin to move it in a skillful direction. So that's a much more subtle thing. But it is really important that we recognize that that's part of the process. It's not just being aware in a kind of passive way, but it's being aware of in a receptive way, and then trying to move things on from there. Um, so that's one of the things we talk about in terms of meditation. And this is not part of the course, this course per se, but in terms of looking at meditation more deeply, is when those strong negative emotions arise, well, how do you respond to them? So how do you respond to craving and hatred and doubt? That's a big one. Um, so hopefully that's a kind of very, very general answer without having more specific content. I'm not sure what else I can say. So I've got a couple more questions. If there's an addendum to that, Michelle, you could let me know. Finton saying, what do you mean by move them on? Well, transform them, basically. So in a way, the whole Buddhist project starts with this idea that we can transform our minds. We can transform hatred into love. So move them on means, in a way, get rid of them. So if there's hatred there or a resentment, is to actually let go of it, so it's no longer there. So that's what I mean by move it on. Um, quite how you do that is something that you can't sort of give an easy answer to. But the basic principle is that you become aware of it, and you hold it with a conviction that you can actually transform it. I think that's really important. So again, the Buddha, this image behind me that represents the possibility of transforming all negative states of mind, that we need to develop a connection with that, so that the conviction that we can do it arises. So that's a part of the reason why I keep coming back to, and what the book keeps coming back to, this idea of the guide. The guide is not just the guide. The guide is also the exemplar of what's possible as a human being. So that's really what the Buddha represents. And then, is it important to speak your life story and to share it that way, or is it enough to write it down just for yourself? That's a good question. I think it can be really good to write things down. I suppose there's something about the act of having your life story or having your experience witnessed by others. So that's one of the profound things that we do as human beings. We can bear witness to each other's experience, and that's part of the reason why why we have these home groups. So it's one thing to go away and practice, but to go away and practice and come back and share your experiences with others adds another dimension to it. You learn more about yourself, you learn more about others. It's just an intrinsically kind of enjoyable and valuable thing to communicate with other people. So I'd say there's something, and also actually the other thing about if you tell somebody else your life story, or if you write it down and they read it, then they might have perspectives on your life which could be revealing to you. I've certainly had that experience when I've given my life story. I remember actually one time I gave it, and somebody who was listening to it just made an observation. I didn't actually like it, but I could see that I didn't like the observation he made, but I could see that he had a point, which was that I would seem to be obsessed with, at that time, with kind of achievement or non-achievement. There was a lot of, the way I framed my life story was all about what I had achieved or not achieved. So I think that's so there's still, I'm sure there's value in writing down your own life story. Even just reflecting on it is very valuable. And I suppose what I'm saying is there's an added value that you might get from having other people witness it, and getting some feedback, so to speak. But and also, giving other people the opportunity to get to know you better. So sometimes we need to, in a way, allow ourselves to be seen, and that can be an important part of a process of growth. Greta's got a question. Yeah. So Greta says, "Hi Yanadar, a question from last week. In the book, Maitreya Bandhu places a strong emphasis on forming friendships with your own gender. Given an example of disintegration as not spending enough time with members of your own gender as causing low-level flirting and relating to the opposite sex as a surrogate father-mother figure, can you say more about this and why this is stressed above forming friendships with both genders?" Okay, so I thought that might come up, and in a way, I think we can. So I just got distracted by a message there. So I think what Maitreya Bandhu is talking about is the value of developing kind of psychological integration by being with members of the same sex. This is something that we've experimented with a lot in Triratna over the course of our 50-year history, and I think in a way it'd be good if he in the book gave a little bit more information about this. It's something myself I've really benefited from, which is developing friendships, and I've lived in communities with other men, and I've got friends who've done that, live with communities with other women, and that they've really benefited from that experience. I can't really, in a way, I can't really argue for what he states in the book. I can't exactly argue again. It's not that I think he's wrong, but it's a difficult thing to argue for. And I don't have the same conviction about, like, for example, low-level flirting or surrogate mother-father figures. I gather that can happen. That people do a thing where they project what they want, what they feel as inadequate in their own mind onto other people. So yeah, anyway, that's not a very satisfactory answer to that question. In a way, it's something that it might be nice to ask him to write a little bit more about, Maitreya Bandhu, to see what his thoughts are on that particular topic. I can see what he's getting at, and I've benefited from it myself, but actually to give a little bit more background is a bit tricky to do. So I've got another question there from Sam. I had an identical experience when telling my life story last night. Right. I think it's an identical experience to what I was talking about. So Sam says, I had an identical experience when telling my life story last night. I think what he meant is what I mentioned about the observation that I was preoccupied with achievement. Can you share any wisdom on overcoming an achievement-orientated life perspective? Overcoming an achievement-orientated life perspective. It's a bit of a tricky one, this one, because in a way it's good to have goals and to achieve them. Like, you know, in a way, the whole Buddhist path is a path, and it suggests that you're getting from point A to point B. Um, so, um, maybe it's more about, well, what are you really trying to develop? So often I think what we do is we put all of our eggs in one basket, which is by achieving this particular outcome, all of my problems will be solved. So I mean, I had an experience like that when I was at secondary school. I really wanted to be a musician, so I really practiced really hard. I played the guitar, and I got into this music course, which was really hard to get into in Wellington in New Zealand, and actually what in a way I put all my eggs in that basket, that getting into that course would solve all of my problems, and it didn't. And in fact I got in quite a terrible state during that course, and got really unhappy because the thing which I'd put all my effort into didn't kind of answer my deeper problems or issues or whatever they were. I subsequently worked through that, but I think what I learned was it was almost as if I had misplaced the need I had on that particular outcome, but actually the outcome that I really wanted was much broader than that. I hope that kind of answers the question. So it's actually looking at what you really want to achieve in your life, rather than placing all of that need for achievement or for growth on one particular sort of external outcome in terms of, you know, I don't know, career or study or something like that. I hope that kind of answers your question. I think this is a lot of what Buddhism does, is it's asking us to evaluate what it is that we think we're going to get from particular experiences. It's not that it's bad to achieve things, but what's problematic is if we expect all of our happiness to come from certain achievements, and so it's like we misplace our sense of security. So and certain things that can't give it. Maybe this gets back to the kind of single sex question about developing deep connections with members of your own sex, is that sometimes it's easier to project things onto other people that we need to develop within ourselves, and it seems to happen more across the genders and in between than in one's own gender. In a way, it's a highly contentious area, that particularly these days, where people are questioning quite profoundly the whole notion of gender itself. Anyway, so yeah, so it is. It has that bit in the book actually has been a bit controversial. Anyway, we better move on. Actually, thanks for the questions. Yeah. So in terms of positive emotion, I just wanted to talk about, in a way, how to work with it a little bit more. I've talked about generally about what it is. But then how to work with it in terms of mindfulness. So last week, or 2 weeks ago actually, we heard about prapancha, about this mental proliferation. So it arises on previous conditioning. Yeah. So according to the way we've thought about our life in the past, we tend to think about that into the future as well. So we've got all these kind of habits of ways of thinking, assumptions, a kind of rough and ready version of things. And we tend to fit all the experience that happens into that. It's as if we've got a kind of explanatory story or narrative. And it's a little bit like, you know, I just described the narrative that I had when I was 17. The narrative I had was, my life is not the way I want it to be. If I manage to get into this music course, it will be the way I wanted it to be. So I kind of, in a way, that was the kind of narrative that I had for my life. That was the kind of way I thought about what my life was about and what I was trying to achieve with my life. Now, subsequently, that was was exposed to be not the full story. I mean, I'm still really happy that I wasn't playing music, and I don't regret that, but it was like I wanted more from the experience than it could give me. So we're all the time doing this. We're kind of creating a story about our life, and it can be kind of self-reinforcing. We tend to filter out what doesn't conform to our story. Again, that's why it could be so useful to give our life story, is that we can start seeing. It's almost like noticing the way that we're thinking about and noticing the way that we're talking about our life. And again, other people can help us with that. So when we say it out loud, it's easier to see it than if we just keep it in the privacy of our own mind. So again, that's one of the valuable aspects of communication. So when we communicate with other people about our thoughts, we start seeing our thoughts in a way just for what they are, which is just thoughts, which is just interpretations, and even we can see that sometimes we've made a false assumption. But we can't see that unless we externalize what's inside outside. So often these narratives are they're like a secondary construction. They're not based on direct experience. They haven't sort of come from anything, or they haven't gone anywhere, and they become a kind of a filter for what we perceive. We filter out things that don't conform with our story. I remember, this is a slightly odd example, but I remember, I'm a bit ashamed about this, but I had a bit of an issue with my granny. This goes back, this is me telling my life story, but my grandmother really was really pleased because I took up the violin when I was a wee boy, and I used to play my grandfather's violin. So this is my granny's husband, my grandfather, who passed away some years previous, and she was really pleased that I played the violin. She always asked me about playing the violin, and I got to a certain point when playing the violin's not very cool thing to do when you're a little boy in New Zealand in a provincial town. So anyway, at a certain point, I decided I wanted to learn to play the guitar. So I was playing jazz guitar, and she kept kind of asking me about did I still play the violin? As a sort of a intemperate teenager, I got pissed off with her, and I think I did. I swore in front of her, and I didn't swear at her, but I remember swearing and knowing that was cursing in front of one's granny was just not something that you should do. But what was really weird is it's almost as if she didn't hear it. It's as if she kind of filtered it out. It was really weird, but I could see that she just kind of erased that from her kind of perception of what was going on, the swearing bit. Anyway, so that's just an example of how we kind of filter out what doesn't conform with our way of looking at things. So again, what we're trying to do with mindfulness is get back from those sort of secondary constructed stories to what our direct experience is. And an element of our direct experience, a really key element, is what we call Vedana. Vedana, the word is Vedana. It's a Pali word and a Sanskrit word. And what it's pointing to, I'm using the word itself because it's pointing to something quite specific in experience that a lot of English words don't quite do justice to. So it's feeling, but in the sense of feeling tone. It's that aspect of experience which is pleasant or painful or neither one nor the other. So every experience that we have has this quality to it. It has this experience that arises with it. So for example, if, probably a lot of us have just had a cup of tea. So when we put the tea in our mouth, it's warm, it's tasty, and we experience that as pleasurable. If we put sour milk by accident in our tea and we put it in our mouth, it'll taste unpleasant to us. And if we have a glass of water, it'll probably taste neither pleasant or, unless we're really thirsty, it'll neither taste pleasant or unpleasant. It's just kind of there. So all of our experience is coloured by Vedana, by things being pleasant or unpleasant or neither one nor the other. Where we experience this most vividly and most strongly and most powerfully is in relation to other people. For example, in terms of pleasure, when people praise us, we find that really pleasurable and we probably want it to continue. If someone criticizes us, we find that really painful and we want it to stop. And maybe we're with somebody and they're neither critical nor praising us, and we just find the whole experience kind of blah, kind of neutral. So I'm pointing this out because emotions arise next, if you see what I mean. So Vedana arises and then emotion arises. Usually it arises at the same time. So somebody does something that we really don't like and we get pissed off. That's the most obvious example. So there's a painful Vedana and then anger arises. Independence upon that painful Vedana. Similarly, with craving, somebody does something that we like, craving arises, and we want it to continue. So we kind of we hanker after it, we get attached to it. So if we're going to start working with our emotions and start trying to develop skillful emotions, we need to start becoming aware of the basic kind of building blocks, the basic starting point of our emotions, which are Vedanas. This is what we do in the Metta Bhavana meditation, quite consciously, that we're working with different kinds of Vedana. So, for example, in the second stage, when we bring to mind our friend, we just recognize, usually what happens, not all the time, but usually is that a pleasant Vedana arises. And what we're trying to see is that actually there's a person there. That person is not there just for our pleasure, that they exist from their own side. They're not just our pleasure person. They're an independent person. You notice this sometimes when somebody, a friend who is normally quite upbeat and you enjoy their company, when they're a bit down the dumps and you don't get that, they're not as much fun, that you don't get as much pleasure from being with them. And it can sort of test the depth of the feeling that you feel for them. It's like that expression we have, a fair weather friend. So anyway, so that's so that's what's happening in the second stage of the Metta Bhavana. And the third stage, what happens is we bring to mind somebody and they're neutral. We actually use that word, neutral. So Vedana is usually talked about as having there's three different kinds. There's pleasurable Vedana, there's unpleasant Vedana, and there's neutral. Neutral really means somewhere in the middle. It's neither strongly pleasant or strongly painful. So again, this is what happens, isn't it? In the neutral person stage, we bring to mind somebody who's neutral, and the tendency is to get distracted because there's no Vedana, there's nothing to there's no interest. So we drift off. So what we're trying to do is stay with that neutral Vedana until something deeper emerges. So just by staying with Vedana, we can develop something a little bit more, loving. And in the difficult person stage, what we're doing is we're actually bringing to mind somebody who is painful, or we find them painful. There's something about them that we find painful. And we're trying to hold that sense of pain, that sense of, just yuck, or tension, with an awareness that they actually exist, that there's more to that person than just the pain that that we feel in relation to them. So we don't have to generate aversion or anger or resentment out of that painful Vedana. So that's really what this week of practice is about, is just exploring in our moment by moment awareness, Vedana, and seeing how it's the building blocks of our emotions. So what we'll do now is we'll just do a little bit of meditation and just explore Vedana. It'll just be a short meditation, about 5 or 10 minutes. So to begin with, just relaxing into what's going on. And being sensitive to what's going on. What's going on in our immediate physical, emotional, and mental experience. And then I'll invite you to bring to mind someone that you like, a friend. Bring them to mind in whatever way feels natural to you. And just notice what it's like, how that feels. Does that feel nice to do that? Does it feel pleasurable to do that? Maybe it just feels boring. Or it might even feel unpleasant. If you're distracted, notice the feeling quality of what you're distracted by. Are you distracted by something nagging you that's unpleasant, or are you hankering after something pleasant? Then just letting that person move into the background. And then bring to mind someone that you don't like, someone who you find difficult. and notice how that feels. Don't presuppose that you know what it's going to feel like. Actually, paying attention to what it actually feels like. So again, this is what we're trying to do in coming to direct experience. We're trying to notice what's actually going on, not what we feel should go on or what we would like to go on, but what's actually going on. So when you bring to mind that difficult person, what actually happens? It might feel fine, it might feel quite easy, or it might feel painful. And then let go of being aware of that person and just sit. Just be with yourself as you are. So we're going to move now. If you want to bring the meditation to a conclusion, hopefully that gave you just a bit of an insight into, what Vedana is and how, you work with that in the Metta Bhavana practice. And hopefully, in a way, what the practice is this week is just to notice that ongoingly. Just notice Vedana, notice your responses of pleasure and pain to people that you encounter. So I'm just going to share a screen of what the practice is this week. So you've got your mindful walk, breathing space, mindful meal. So particularly this week is just tuning into Vedana. So noticing what the sensations are that you experience. So with a mindful walk, as you walk along, you'll notice some things you're attracted to and some things you're repelled by. So, at the moment, well, frankly, I mean, everyone's sort of throwing off their clothes, and not completely, but sometimes. But just noticing your responses to seeing a bit more flash than you're normally used to. Just noticing if pleasure arises. Noticing what you want, the eye kind of lingers on. Also noticing disgust. If there's people whose behaviour you don't approve of, or maybe there's a mess on the pavement. Just sort of noticing those responses, noticing the beauty of the blue sky, the evening light on the trees, or whatever it happens to be. But just actually sort of noticing the sort of taste, the savour of life. Noticing whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So that's sort of the particular focus this week. And just in a way, you just notice it, just recognize it for what it is. You don't really have to do anything with it except just notice that it's there. It can kind of give you a slightly different sense of what's going on in life when you start looking at it in this kind of way. You might notice that you actually realize that certain things you're giving your attention to that are pleasant or painful, in a way it's not helping you, it's not beneficial to you to give your attention to them, and you need to maybe pay attention to something else, whether literally paying attention with your senses or paying attention with the mind, what the mind lingers on. So the next thing is a practice. I read that poem Reciprocity earlier about this relationship between generosity and appreciation or gratitude. And one really good way of developing a healthy emotional attitude, a skillful emotional attitude, is by beginning to change what we reflect on. I mentioned this earlier. So rather than reflecting on things which we don't like, or which we don't appreciate, or which are painful, try and bring attention to things that we do appreciate. So you notice that, that thing if you, went to a shop or a restaurant and the staff were rude to you, you probably go away and tell people about, hey, you didn't appreciate it and I went to this restaurant, the staff were terrible. But we don't tend to do that so much when things happen that we enjoy or that we appreciate. So that's what we're trying to do, is just redress that sort of the disproportionate way that we attend to things which we don't like. And one way you can do that is just to spend some time reflecting on what we are grateful for. So this is a very simple little practice of just writing down 5 things that you're grateful for every day. And again, it's something that you might want to do at the same time every day. And it doesn't have to be anything enormous. It doesn't have to be, the fact that you're alive, although it could be. But, it might be just the fact you write down, well, it was a sunny day today and I really loved sitting in the sun, or I appreciated the fact that the meal that I was given was really delicious, or the fact that, I don't know, that you had a good night's sleep. So you're just writing down 5 things. And Maitreya Bandhu in the book suggests you do this before you go to bed. You could do it. I don't think it matters what time of the day that you do it, but just that you do it probably at the same time, just so you can remember. One thing you might try is actually doing it before you meditate. It can help you kind of, you just develop a kind of positive orientation, a skillful orientation for your meditation practice. So it's what we're trying to do is change the habit of what we dwell on in our mind. In a way, change the narrative from one of more grievance or disappointment or a kind of moaning narrative to an appreciative narrative, which is really just about changing what we pay attention to and what we dwell on, which is a big part of what positive emotion is, changing what we attend to and what we dwell on. So that's the second thing, is taking some time to just write down 5 things that we're grateful for. The third thing is generosity. So again, I've mentioned this already, this is the other side of the coin, is to do one generous thing each day. So this is actually for the next 2 weeks. So, it's a bit like, if it's just doing the dishes, even if it's not your turn to do the dishes, I don't know, just helping the next door neighbour's got a sticky door and she finds it hard to get out of the house. So, just maybe if you're in the kitchen, you see that you could give the door a bit of a push from outside to help her out. Or, I don't know, like it could be 1,000,001 things. Again, it doesn't have to be anything enormous. And it might be something that you think about in advance. You might reflect, oh, well, what can I do for the people I live with that's generous? And one really key thing about this is you don't have to feel like it. If you see something needs doing and you respond to it, that's you developing positive emotion. And this is why, in a way, it's more important to think about what you're doing, the volition, than the feeling. So that's what modifies character, is actually seeing something that needs doing, or something that somebody needs something and responding. So it's that. So you could say positive emotion is a profound responsiveness to others, and we can start developing that just by doing the things that we know will be helpful, and not worrying too much if our motives are mixed, not worrying too much if we're just doing it because we're doing a course and that's what it says to do in the course, or not worrying if we want to be seen as being a nice person. Not all that kind of will come out in the wash, but I think it's a really, really good habit to get into, to just respond without thinking too much to needs when we see them, when we witness them. And the fourth thing is just to remind you about meditation. I mean, in terms of developing these kind of stages of the path, positive integration, positive emotion, and so on, meditation is the most powerful means that we have to develop these things. So particularly with positive emotion, the meditation practice which epitomizes positive emotion is the Metta Bhavana, in the same way that the mindfulness of breathing epitomizes integration. So this week you might like to just focus on Metta Bhavana. I'm not saying you should do it every day. You could if you wanted, but just put a bit more emphasis on Metta Bhavana. So I'm just going to stop talking for a couple of minutes and just let you think about your practice this coming week. So the mindful walk, 5 things that you're grateful for, write them down, and then doing one generous thing every day. And it might be, you might like to give a bit of thought to what you're going to do with your meditation this week. So this is just a couple of minutes for you to develop some intentions for the coming week. Okay, so there's a couple of interesting items in the chat box. Owen saying achievement is generally a great state of mind, which I totally agree with. I suppose what I was trying to say earlier, just in case it's been misperceived, is not that there's anything wrong with achievement, but sometimes we overload achievement with all kinds of other things, which makes it problematic. So the experience I had, actually, I talked about getting into that course, was when I achieved that, I just felt relief rather than any sort of positive sense of achievement, which was indicative, I think, of a sort of an over emphasis on that for me at that time. But I think achievement is really good, just to feel that you can do stuff, that you feel effective. And I mean, I think in this book, Maitreya Bandhu talks about a sense of mastery, just having a sense of, yeah, I can do stuff, I'm effective, and so on. Oh dear. I've just seen that some people still haven't got their book, so I don't know, Daniel, if you could do that trick again this week. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's fine. No, it's grand.
Thanks.
I prepared for it already.
Oh, great. Thanks. Cheers. I know some people have got their books in the last week. And then Dimitri's got an interesting comment about the comment. She says, seeing a member of the opposite sex as a maternal or paternal figure is very real, but of course does not apply to every intergender relationship. I think what Maitreya Bandhu is trying to say is form a relationship with someone that we are less likely to misinterpret as a protector or leader or carer, for that matter. Someone neutral. That does not necessarily mean avoiding forming relationships with both genders. At least this is how I interpret this point. Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. That's a kind of topic, actually, that doesn't lend itself to this kind of format. It'd be good to be able to sit around and discuss that, because it's quite a meaty kind of area. But yeah, thanks for that. That's an interesting comment. So that's it for this week. So do read the book. Do read the chapter. It's there's some great stuff in it. And again, just don't worry about feeling like you have to do absolutely everything in the book. You won't be able to. So just make sure that the things you take on to do, that you really do, and don't worry too much about the other things that you don't quite that you don't quite manage. If you've got any questions, please do hang on afterwards. I'll be here for a little while afterwards. And I think that's all I need to say, actually. I'll just, see you next week.